When someone breaks your heart and shatters it to pieces, are you going to ever be the same person? The same goes for beliefs and what you value. When you join into groups out of love for something, and then that something takes a complete blindsided shift, and you're like, that's not what I signed up for. Welsh nationalists have broken my heart, and Celtic nationalists more widely. And having your heart broken does not remove your love. It just leaves a scar right here on your heart forever. Welsh nationalists have chosen to side with our enemies, and for the longest time I didn't understand this, and I had to reflect. I had to sit back and think, what could have caused these three Christian nations, these three Western nations, and especially Wales with its Roman inheritance, to turn away and actually hate that Western civilization and join with those who seek to destroy it? What could have possessed them to do this? My name is Benjamin Angwin, and let's get into this video. I've got notes here. For those of you who have helped me on Buy Me a Coffee, investing in the channel, I'm getting equipment that will make this not needed. And each Ireland, Wales, and Scotland have helped in their own way to restore the nation of Israel, to defend that Judeo-Christian inheritance that is the bedrock, the soil of our civilization. So first off, let's go to Ireland. In the early 19th century, there was a man named Daniel O'Connell who was big into emancipation of Catholics. He was the first Catholic MP for the British Empire. That's significant. And he actually fought for Jewish rights, raising awareness, seeing it as they shouldn't be excluded from civic life. That was big. And then after the Damascus affair in 1840, it's basically a medieval slander of Ottoman-held Syria in which Jews were persecuted under the authorities. Daniel O'Connell spoke out about this, not from a diplomatic point of view, but from his own principles, of his own religious roots. That's what it stemmed from. And this shocked the British establishment. And this was a direct precursor to Benjamin Disraeli, who, Jewish descent, became British Prime Minister, as well as several other leading figures, even though Ireland never really had a large Jewish population. He said, Ireland has never persecuted the Jews. Whether that's true or not is another matter, but certainly in his time it was more lenient than other places. We'll give him that. I need to mention here that Daniel O'Connell is steeped in the Catholic tradition. He's using Catholic ideas to push up Irish nationalism, and he's connecting that to the struggles that Jewish people face, that the center of the struggle is religious, that that's where you draw your strength up from, that's your identity. Now, I must be clear, Daniel O'Connell was before what we think of as Zionism by at least 40 years. But he laid down a worldview within the psyche of the British Empire that led to support of Zionism, awakened an idea that the Jewish people had these rights and they had a land as well. He said that Jewish suffering is everyone's business, which was radical at the time. But it took more modern technology than was available in his time to bring that Irish message to the world. And so, years after him, or going into the 1880s, with Michael David, Land League founder, fought for land reforms. There were serious abuses with the landlords in Ireland, which is what really, for every purpose, led to Irish independence. The abuses of that system and the extraction of resources. Now, Michael David is not a friend of the Jewish people, no, but he got into the journalism business. And there were pogroms going on in Eastern Europe in the Pale of Settlement. Ironic from an Irish point of view. But the Pale was actually, rather than a foreign imposition in Ireland, this was part of the Russian Empire in which Jews were restricted to where they could settle. However, they were still a minority in this Pale of Settlement, right? So people ganged up on the Jews and inflicted pogroms. In 1885, as pogroms are beginning in Russia, Michael David visits Ottoman-occupied then Palestine, and he doesn't really write much about it, but he comes out of that in the following years in favor of the ideas that are becoming, or would become, Zionism. And in 1903, there's the Kishinev pogrom. This is a city now in Moldova, was part of the Russian Empire, in which I think 92 or 93 Jews were killed and horrific things done to many others. And he was a journalist at the time. And he managed to get his writings to William Randolph Hearst, an American business mogul of the media. And this presented Jewish suffering to the world through the American audience and then back to Britain. And this won over many people to the new idea promulgated by Theodor Herzl of the Jewish state. This was really the naissance of Zionism. And without him publishing through Hearst's media empire, this may never have come to more people. He won over the hearts and minds of people who were then funding settlements in then Palestine, right? And without this Irish contribution, I don't know if Israel would have, well, it probably would have come to be, but not certainly the shape that it did. A lot of people funded these Zionist initiatives because of his reporting in the Kishinev pogrom. He also came to see that Zionism is the only solution for what he saw as the Jewish problem. Like I said, he wasn't a friend of Jewish people. He accused political opponents of basically financial Jewish corruption and other ridiculous stereotypes. So what we see in these two men is Irish moral tradition growing out of Catholicism, then expanding through that into the media world and spreading the message in support of Zionism as it was being born across the English-speaking world. And then you had a young solicitor, a young lawyer, named David Lloyd George, at the same time in Wales. The story of religion in Wales is quite different to Ireland. In exchange for a printed Bible to keep the Welsh language alive, the Welsh basically converted to Protestantism and gave up Catholicism. And it worked. The Welsh language became that which steeped people in their native culture. And that native culture was rooted in Hebrew ideas. David Lloyd George noted that he was often more familiar with the landscapes, geography, and place names of Israel than he was of his own Wales. Remarkable. Children in the 19th century in Wales basically memorized the Old Testament in Welsh. That's quite an achievement. That's quite a level of literacy. Think about this. The Welsh language itself has a name for Moses, Moisen. Egypt, Eire, which, by the way, we're not really sure even where that word comes from. It seems connected to me to Eith in a very vaguely distant ancient way, and that suggests a Welsh word for Exodus, as if the Welsh word for Egypt itself is a reference to Israel. Iorddonen for Jordan. Libanos is a place name in Wales, but it also is the name for the country of Lebanon. And the name in Welsh for Jerusalem, Caersalem. This Caer bit at the beginning is a stronghold. It's a reference to the stronghold around the old temple, a reference to resistance against the Roman Empire by the indigenous Jews. And David Lloyd George would have been steeped in this. He had a Baptist father, and this would have been in Welsh. I can't stress enough that it goes back way further than that. David, the prince who took up leadership of Gwynedd after Llywelyn the Last was killed. David means David, and it doesn't come from Dewi Sant, Saint David. That's not how it translates in the Welsh language. And a prince wouldn't have been named after Dewi Sant at that specific, in that period, in that century, right? This was a reference to King David. The Welsh dynasty was trying to inspire a Hebrew-like Jewish-like resistance, a sacred land-based resistance to the empire, evoking King David, hoping for aspirational piety and religious fervor to defend their land and the people. But back to David Lloyd George, this non-conformist tradition, steeped in these Hebrew ideas, saw Israel as this, well, I suppose grail is a good word, that would rejuvenate life in civilization itself. In 1903, his law firm acted for Theodor Herzl, helping, defend ideas around the Uganda scheme, which was Jewish people were looking for a place to, restore Israel, basically. And Uganda wasn't going to work. But the fact is, David Lloyd George's law firm was very willing, from the beginning, early days, to work with Zionists. And then in 1914, David Lloyd George, in November 1914, he was basically standing up and openly saying in Parliament that Israel will be run by Jews again. This will be restored to the Jewish people. It's inevitable. A Welshman was at the height, the head of the British Empire at its height, the pinnacle of human civilization and culture that has built and defined the structures of our world today. And he was a Zionist, passionately so, rooted and steeped not from an English identity, but from a Welsh one. That's where the wellspring of his beliefs came from. This non-conformist faith is the anchor of his Welshness. In 1916, as Prime Minister during a very dark period, mind, he doesn't just inherit the World War, he inherits the buddings of this Zionism, and he's passionately for it because he's Welsh. The anti-Zionists in this age are almost all English, right? That's a radical leftist position that is anti-Welsh language. And in response to these critics, he sets up a pro-Zionist cabinet, and then goes on to set up Herbert Samuel as the first Jew to govern in the land since Roman times. It's a remarkable achievement. And I must stress that this is not an American evangelical type Zionism. This is non-conformist. This is Welsh. This is basically like Jewish resistance against the empire. This is a people so embedded in their land that removing them from it does not remove their love of it after 2,000 years. David Lloyd George, as a Welshman, deeply attached to his own land, understood this. David Lloyd George had been raised upon the Psalms of the Old Testament, the songs calling Jews back over how many centuries. He sang these, he knew these, they were part of his reason and how he saw the world. They were part of what made him Welsh. And it saddens me so deeply that Welsh nationalists today seem to forget what actually created Wales. Without David Lloyd George, there is no Balfour Declaration. And I made a video on David Lloyd George and his contribution to Zionism. But let's go to Scotland, another Christian country with its own Christian tradition. Arthur Balfour. Arthur is a Welsh name, but Lord Balfour, he came to be known as, was born in 1848 and inherited a Presbyterian Scotland. Certainly by that point, very Presbyterian. And what makes Presbyterianism so distinct, either from Anglicanism of England, non-conformity in Wales, and Catholicism in Ireland, is Presbyterianism is essentially, it focuses on the covenant. They see it as a chosen people. This is direct imitation of what is being Jewish, essentially, and the covenant with the land and a chosen people. You can't get away from that. And Lord Balfour, even though he may not have practiced Presbyterianism strictly in that sense, he would be having a deep, deep relationship with the Hebrew Bible as a foundation of his own Scottish identity. Scotland adopted a Calvinistic theology, which was quite radical. It came out of Switzerland and the Reformation, all of that, and this was something that boiled up through Scotland over 3 centuries, really shifting its identity, creating a new Scotland that allowed it a distinction from both England and Ireland. And that distinction is important because it meant that it wasn't going to be in conflict with the Anglican Church in the same way as the Catholics were, but it wasn't going to side with the popery stuff. This was an individualist bond, this covenant. And Israel itself and the Jewish people's connection with it is a covenant between the people and God. With the land, it's a triangle: land, God, covenant, connecting them. Presbyterianism, it didn't quite have the land bit, but it had that covenant bit. And in 1906, Lord Balfour met Chaim Weizmann, who would become Prime Minister of Israel. The meeting lasted a lot longer than was expected, and Weizmann was lobbying against the Uganda scheme because there's no connection between the Jewish people and Uganda, at least not a deep one, and they wanted their own land. And Lord Balfour clearly at least acknowledged this. You hear the birds? The Jews' connection to Palestine, which itself is an insult from Roman times and before, it's not a policy, it's an identity. And Weizmann was able to express this to Lord Balfour and leave a lasting impression upon him with these notions of the covenant. I can't stress enough that the anti-Zionist establishment in Britain was mostly English. And it just so happened that a Welshman, backed by a Scot in Lord Balfour with lots of nice connections, was able to break this anti-Zionism at the right exact moment. I consider this some type of miracle. What else could it be? That at that exact moment a Welshman ruled the British Empire, and a Scot steeped in these Presbyterian ideas signed off on the declaration that would be the forerunner to the re-establishment of the State of Israel. That's remarkable. And it only happened, really, because each of these countries had their own indigenous Christian tradition and its own relationship with Hebrewism and Judaism and the Old Testament. Ireland's universalism, or its Catholic universalism, enabled Kidim Daimlad, sympathy with. That's Welsh for empathy kind of thing. Welsh non-conformity allowed a structure to develop. Welsh like their committees to sit and discuss. And at that time, discussion is what was needed. And this discussion was only allowed or enabled by the changing of public opinion brought about by the Irishman, David, who spread these ideas to the world through American papers. And then alliances in power were needed, and Scotland and its Presbyterian tradition enabled that to form, which broke the anti-Zionist establishment in England and paved the way for the rebirth of Israel. And as you can see, I'm very passionate about this. And it breaks my heart that Welsh nationals and Scottish nationals and the Irish radicals seem to have forgotten their own roots. I don't see these people going to church or synagogue or temple. I don't see them having any higher connection. I don't see them discussing the Old Testament in public, as their ancestors did century after century after century, to the point that their interpretation of those Old Testament ideas is what formed each of these nations in their own way. Presbyterianism, Welsh non-conformist Protestantism, and Irish Catholicism, each with their own relationship to the covenant and the Old Testament, forged with their language and geopolitical situations, is what built each of these nations in the first place. And they've come unmoored from that anchor. And if they're going to side against their own roots, against what created their own Celtic nations, that leaves a scar on my heart. We see them joining anti-Zionists, and that's ironic, because without your roots and your ancestors, Israel would probably not even exist today. Presbyterianism, Catholicism, Non-Conformism. Each of these Christian traditions have a different relationship with the Old Testament. And when you fused all of them together at that exact moment, at the height of the British Empire, that enabled the rebirth of Israel. Only that. That is a miracle. And if Welsh nationalists are going to side against what is potentially the greatest miracle in all of human history, that scars my heart. And you might have noticed I'm shifting direction on this channel. The light behind me is not red anymore. It's blue. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a donation. We'll see you next time.